Every day, 34 people in their 20s and 30s are diagnosed with cancer.
On the 7th of July 2015, I was one of the 34.
On the 28th of August 2008, I was one of the 34.
But what about when you're in your teens?
Because teenagers get diagnosed too.
These are the stories of what happens afterwards.
This is AfterThoughts.
The teenagers. Toby Peach. I don't need to sing. Toby! Yeah.
Hi, Alice May Purkiss. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm wearing a roll neck, which always makes me feel like...
Steve Jobs?
I was going to say The Rock, actually.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen that picture of The Rock where he's wearing high-waisted jeans, a roll neck, a gold chain, and a bum bag? You must have seen it. It's iconic.
Iconic. Probably, yeah. Probably.
That's what I feel like, because I always wear high-waisted jeans. So whenever I wear this jumper, it's my post-swimming thermals. And that's how I feel when I wear this top. It's a strong
look of a wrestler turned Hollywood superstar.
I am a wrestler turned Hollywood superstar. How are you? How's your day been?
I'm all right, thank you. I do have a little bit of a sore throat, which is causing me a little bit of, it's now at the end of recording, a little bit of, ugh. But I'm so glad that we've had...
a little bit of what, sorry?
A little bit of, that's...
That sounds like a little bit of, a little bit of, What's that song?
Isn't that Spice Girls?
No. I don't know, it's gone anyway. Carry on.
We have been delighted to have Kaleb with us today to introduce to us some of the stories of Kaleb's experience of having... Now, it came from a brain hemorrhage, but I've actually realised that I don't think we mentioned how to say pilositic astrocytoma.
Yeah, pilositic astrocytoma, I believe is the correct way to say it, but
did you like my version, or do you think
just call it a brain tumour?
We'll just call it a brain tumour. Shall we pass over to Kaleb and get started?
Absolutely. Hello and welcome back to another episode of AfterThoughts.
Hello, Alice, and welcome to Kaleb, who is joining us today. Welcome, Kaleb.
Hiya.
Hi, thanks so much for joining us and coming on AfterThoughts. Where are you calling in from?
At the moment, I'm calling from my room at the university in Oxford, and it's a considerable upgrade from last year in that the windows don't flap. You can't break them by closing the windows too forcefully, and I no longer have 3 bin lorries driving past my room every morning. It is lovely, actually. I get a view out over the little green garden centre of the college.
Does this mean that you did break a... Did you break a glass? Did you break something?
I didn't break a glass, but my housemate did break a glass. But I don't fault him for that because that glass was thin. It was like cling film.
Oh,
Kaleb, you have been telling us that though you have caught the freshers flu though, right?
I have caught. Yeah, I've been infected by the younguns. But no, I mean, to be honest, given that we were helping out with their club nights and things, I'm surprised it took this long before I got any freshers flu. So I think it's making its merry way around the college at the moment.
It must be an indication of fun being had if you've got a touch of the freshers flu. Everybody's been out having a nice time, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Kaleb, what was freshers like last year? Because it must have been very...
It was surreal. I suppose it's summed up by one of the evening social events, which involved sitting outdoors in the relative cold in a covered sort of canopy area with masks on, in a busy, crowded tent, which was loud and sort of heaving with the sort of thrum of a crowd, doing sort of speed socials with other people, trying to yell at them through your mask to make yourself heard, or alternately yelling and then desperately sort of craning your ear towards them. So I think that pretty much sums up what Freshers was like last year.
I bet it was just wild going to uni last year and starting uni last year. I bet it was just so strange.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was lucky enough. I had some very lovely housemates, but it always brings its challenges. It was all the intensity, I suppose, of any sort of transition in life. It's not exclusive to university, but of a significant transition to a new social environment, but with an added element of compression.
Wow. Well, let's hope that you get over the flu. But I'm hoping that maybe our quick fire questions might be the way to loosen that flu up.
I'm really glad you said loosen that flu and not loosen that phlegm.
Oh, yeah.
The image that gave of me was one that would be deeply unpleasant for you to see on your screens, which is a sudden offloading of snot from my nose onto my laptop keyboard.
Hooray! That's what we want from AfterThoughts.
Yeah, I mean, if anything's gonna loosen you up and get you ready, it's these quick fire questions, right?
I mean, they're really not that quick fire, but we'll get in as quick as we can. Kaleb, are you ready for the quick fire questions?
I think I'm ready. I'm locked in, or whatever they say on game shows.
Kaleb, could you please give us the pronouns you use, please?
He, him.
Who do people say that you look like?
God, I don't know, but the best one I got, which was yelled on the school bus in year 7 by a group of lads who used to sit at the back and tended to alternate between general sort of low-key violence or racism, but was yelling, "Oi, Alistair Cook! Alistair Cook!" And I have no interest in cricket, so I had no idea who he was and stood silent, nodded, and wanted to get off the bus as quickly as I could. It wasn't as bad as getting they threw, I think it was an orange at the back of my head, and it hit the back of my head because they enjoyed throwing fruit across the bus, but I don't think it was a healthy eating campaign. But my friend decided that he was going to throw it back. So he did, and then it was reciprocated with a pear, which I can from that limited experience tell you is more painful to the back of the head than an orange, especially when it partially explodes.
Oh, maybe they were testing to see if you were Alistair Cook, to see if you would catch it.
Yeah, and needless to say, I didn't.
Right, okay. Kaleb, would you rather live by the sea or by the mountains?
I think I'd rather live by the sea.
Nice.
Yeah, I think I'd enjoy the sort of mellowness of it. I'd enjoy the ocean walks. I'd enjoy, I think I'd probably enjoy a bit of paddling in the sea. I can't say I'd swim in it. I do like a swim, but not in that sort of cold. And to be honest, I'd like the fudge shops and fish and chips.
Nice. Would you rather time travel forwards or backwards?
I think I'd rather time travel backwards, not to be incredibly pessimistic, but part of me doesn't want to see what's happening in the future, and at least I have a vague awareness of what's going on in the past. I've got my soppy time travel thing. If I don't have to worry about any of the time loop nonsense or causing that, one of the places I go, I'm going to my parents' wedding, because I will sit there in the back and I will cry. But
that's so great. I love it.
Kaleb,
it's only because they had some adorable songs played, and
oh, I love that.
Kaleb, what's your favourite part of a roast dinner?
I think, and this may become clear later on, it's the roast potatoes.
You're the first person that said that, and that's my favourite part.
Who is your celebrity fascination, not crush?
That's
someone you find really interesting.
I think my general thing, it's more of a broader one, but I'm I'm a compulsive Wikipedia searcher of celebrities as they come up on the telly, but the only thing that ever stores in my head is what kind of education they had, whatever it was, it's sort of. But so I seem to have this disparate. I might not know anything about them apart from I know what. I know, I might know what type of secondary school they went to or something, or what they did at university if they went to university, or what apprenticeship they did.
What superpower would you choose to have if you could have one?
Oh, that's a very good one. I ponder this one quite a lot, but you know what? At the moment, purely because I'm in the sort of college accommodation at the moment, I'd really like the power to be able to touch toilet roll and make it triple ply. Just a low-key thing, so I don't have to worry about any ramifications or accidentally destroying the world with that. But if I could just make toilet roll triple ply with a touch, I'd be sorted.
Niche, but fantastic.
Yeah.
What's your go-to karaoke song?
Oh, I do like a bit of karaoke. Can't do it very well, but I do like it. I think it's Tainted Love by Soft Cell. But the Northern Soul version is also outstandingly good.
Big question. Would you rather be a hawk or a hedgehog?
Oh, I think my gut instinct is hedgehog. Just because I think they just look like very peaceful animals.
And
when they're being left alone, they look very happy.
And lastly, could you just give us a one-line summary of your diagnosis, please?
Yeah, I had a brain hemorrhage from a previously undiagnosed low-grade brain tumour, which then grew in 2019, and I had further treatment.
Just to let people know that in this story, Kaleb does talk about reoccurrence, and if that might be something that would be triggering for you, you might want to skip this story. First up on Afterthoughts, we are moving into Beyond a Diagnosis. This is an opportunity to tell a story that is not that diagnosis story, because that's the one we get asked to talk about all the time. So we're going to look at a Beyond the Diagnosis story. Kaleb, over to you.
Yeah, so although I was initially diagnosed in 2015 after a brain hemorrhage in Morocco, the tumour remained stable for, after surgeries, the tumour seemed to be quite stable, and it remained stable for about 4 years. But in October 2019, after a scan in June 2019 and a bit of an agonising 3-month wait, I found out that my tumour had regrown, to both mine and my clinician's surprise. I think it's one of those memories that's sort of irrevocably imprinted in my brain, sitting in the neurosurgeon's room and sort of have that vague inkling that something's wrong. And when there's someone sitting in the room ready to make notes that you haven't met before, then alarm bells ring. So, I remember that as he said, your tumour's grown, which, to be honest, is one of those things that for me at least was helpful to be told bluntly. And I think it induced all sorts of feelings of sort of shock, but beyond anything else, actually, because, and everyone deals with these things differently and totally legitimately. Those different ways are totally valid, but I think my way of dealing with those things is with a quite conscious and deliberate emotional shutdown that for me was helpful in the moment, but all of those emotions I was doing my very best to turn off and to go into the what treatment, why are you giving it, what are the alternatives, why are you not giving the alternatives. So I think I went into I very consciously and deliberately detached myself, which had its advantages, but we might talk about this later. It has its long term. It was difficult for me to pull myself out of that and get into some of the actual recognition of the emotions themselves. Next up was moving into the pre-proton preparations, which, although beautifully alliterative, was a bit of a faff. That involved, because of the way proton beam therapy works, and particularly with a brain tumour, it can affect things like sight and hearing and fertility, because of the hormones effects, and because of partly because of where my tumour is. As the best summer I ever had from my Birmingham Children's Hospital neurosurgeon was nice tumour, nasty place. So because it's right in the centre of my brain, it's right near to lots of nice little important things. So after having had baseline eye tests and hearing tests, I went to one of the neighbouring hospitals to the QE for fertility preservation in the event that the treatment affected my fertility. The partial problem was that since my brain hemorrhage, I think in part because it had massively affected my testosterone, but not so much that I was over the baseline to receive replacement therapy, although I was sort of just on the border. I'd pretty much spent 4 years living the life of a celibate monk, so it was a bit of a difficult one. And being taken into they take you into a windowless, which I appreciate, because no one wants to see you masturbating over 3 stories up at from the QE car park. But it's a windowless room with a single unshaded yellowing light bulb and entirely full of wipe clean furniture. So it's not the sexiest room. And I sort of assumed, having never done anything like this before, and also having basically lived a celibate life for 4 years after my hemorrhage, I thought, what's probably going to happen is, not that I'd look at it normally, but they're probably just going to give you a porn mag. Nothing. Use your mind. Enter your mind palace and here wank into this tube. So it took 2 attempts. I had to come back on another day because the first attempt was so poor. But when I came back on the other day, apparently my sperm motility is higher than average. Yes, which I was very pleased with.
We always like to talk about those around us because we know that the impacts of cancer are really, really far-reaching. So the next section of Afterthoughts explores some of those people that cancer also affects.
Yeah. So in the run-up to Christmas, because the proton beam therapy usually took weekends off, and it took bank holidays off. So during in that whole lead up, there was a sort of will we, won't we go home for Christmas? And I think as it got closer to the time, we increasingly realised we would quite like to. As much as my little gluttonous heart quite liked the idea of spending Christmas in Manchester because it's a temple to food, I think we realised actually it would make us feel, for myself and for my parents, just a bit more grounded after having to completely uproot and move. So my dad, in true wonderful fashion, had prepared all of the Christmas food in the small hotel kitchen. And he'd done everything. So it was all just in neat little boxes, ready to be defrosted wherever we were going to have Christmas. And after I finished my proton beam therapy for the day on Christmas Eve on December 24th, popped into the Teenage Cancer Trust Christmas party, and then just to say hello. And then we bundled ourselves into the car from the proton beam car park and sped down the motorway I would like to make this clear, because we were by that point veterans of ping-ponging between Birmingham and Manchester. At that point there were some roadworks on there, and if you knew just the right spot, you could get into one of the little slip roads within the motorway because they were doing the roadworks, which was always clear because no one else knew about it. And it was the sort of executive, it was the proton path.
But quick question, just how did Santa know where you were going to be?
Obviously, got a heads up.
I'd made sure to tell Santa by sending emails in triplicate.
On Afterthoughts, we are diving now into invisible impacts, and that is an opportunity for us to hear a story about some of the things that we might not directly see in a person who's experienced cancer, because some of the things aren't always visible. So over to you, Kaleb, for invisible impacts.
I think for me, one of the biggest things has been the sort of lost conversations and lost acknowledgements of the fact that ultimately it's a traumatic experience, and it doesn't matter how people are diagnosed. It's partly the diagnosis itself, but it's all of the enduring ripples. It's like a very big rock thrown into a very small pond that probably damages someone's precious koi carp on the way. But it's those reverberating ripples that spread out. And I suppose I find the ripple analogy quite helpful, because the quality of them changes over time, and they might fade, but it's more that the quality of it changes over time. And that, I think for me, it's been recognizing that trauma and loss, it doesn't define me, but it is and has been a very significant part of my life. I suppose initially when I was diagnosed, I was genuinely, and this is not to say that anyone should be, but it was just how it was for me, ridiculously grateful. My continuing entirely earnestly felt mantra for about a year after I was diagnosed was, "Oh, I'm so lucky. It could have been so much worse, and I'm so grateful." But it's not like, for some people it's like this, and and when I was in that waiting room, do you remember when we saw so and so, and I'm really grateful it's not like that. So it was a genuine Paddington Bear persona, which I think in some ways it was an earnest response, and it was also, I think, for me, an emotional survival response, because by being grateful, I didn't have to confront what was horrendous and terrifying about my experience with the haemorrhage, and I suppose later when my tumour grew. I think some of that's gradually changed over the years, but I think all of this, for all of us, it's an ongoing process. It's been a shift more towards recognizing the validity of my own emotions, that me having an emotion does not affect anyone else. How I choose to express and deal with that emotion does, but the actual emotion it doesn't affect anyone else. I'm not insulting anyone by feeling anything. I think that was one of my big things, that I felt that by acknowledging the upset and loss and trauma that I was feeling, I might be insulting those who'd, for example, bluntly had died. But that's not the case. It's just those things are just going on in my own head, and that's fine. I think probably one of the big moments was in 2015, about a month or so after I'd been diagnosed, because I was still, we didn't know quite what state I was in. So my dad had slept on the floor of my bedroom for about, every night for a month, just to make sure that I was okay. And I think one night it really, to be honest, the sheer horrendousness of it all hit me, having been, alone, away from home, away from my parents, on a school trip, diagnosed with a brain tumour I didn't know I had, feeling horrendously sick, all of the hospital experiences. And it was that was the first time that I'd expressed any particularly painful emotion about it, and I just sobbed. And so he and I watched, and as I would genuinely recommend for anyone, we watched John Wick, and the fact that those buggers kill his dog was really quite cathartic. So John Wick was a moment of solace there. I think after that, and it was the afternoon after I'd sat my last GCSE. My mum took me to the Children's Hospital for an initial assessment for a series of psychology sessions that I had from late 2016 and a couple in early 2017. And those were a sort of huge revelation. I think the sort of just innate validity of emotions, the partly acknowledgement, I think I prefer over acceptance of trauma, because acceptance, I think, and for some people I appreciate, it's a huge reassurance. I have a huge problem with acceptance because I don't think you should have to accept as natural and normal and right something that's happened to you that is horrible and painful and unpleasant. I think you can accept that it's nothing about really fairness or unfairness. It's just shit happens, basically. And that I find hugely reassuring, that there's, I mean, I know for some people the idea of fate is really reassuring. I think for me the randomness of the world is very reassuring. But that acknowledgement of trauma was a huge thing. And then when my tumour grew in 2019, I had some sessions in 2020. I think it was just about 3 or 4 over the phone, with a really wonderful psychologist, where fundamentally a lot of what came out of that was again the same acknowledgement of trauma and loss and pain, but also an awareness of my instinct. I mean, my instinct is to shut off from that emotion and just go into pragmatic, right? How are we going to deal with this? How are we going to deal with that? And who am I, particularly with friends, that I think a lot of people in the cancer community do it. The quite intense and quite tiring watching for emotion. How much can I disclose before I make someone uncomfortable? Not as a cruel experiment, but at that point I'm absolutely going to stop. And it's partly looking out for other people's emotions. I think it's partly not wanting to deal with that awkwardness, because when that awkwardness arises, it is the elephant in the room. It's the trip hazard in the conversational walkway. I think that was those were some of the really hugely helpful things that came out of that. But ultimately it's been the acknowledgement of the emotion, because I think that's been one of the biggest revelations of the last few years to me, that acknowledging the emotion doesn't create the emotion. It's not going to go away until it's acknowledged. It's if there's a hole in the wall, it's not going to be filled up until you acknowledge it's there. So yeah, I think that's been one of the biggest things for me, and I think that is one of the things that's not talked about enough. That I appreciate for some people it helps, but I think there is a widespread, not just in the cancer community, but a toxic, an idea of toxic positivity. But not to be too blunt, but it just doesn't help, or it didn't help me. It worked for a year, and then I was getting trauma flashbacks, and I was waking up in the night crying, and I didn't know why. And actually it was because of that. Once I acknowledged that what had happened was shit, then it really massively declined.
And now on Afterthoughts, we are going to move on to teenage kicks. There are lots of experiences that young adult cancer patients have that their peers will never experience. And this section aims to explore some of those.
Yeah, I suppose for me, one of the biggest things has been my campaign of brain tumour freebies, whereby I sort of think it's a pretty grim situation in some ways. So it's quite, it's nice to have a little pick-me-up thing. And I think particularly after, I started doing them after diagnosis, and I was in year 11. And one of the things that I was doing at that point was my GCSE English coursework. One of the 3 pieces of which was oriented around, I think it was it was primarily meant to be a persuasive piece, and the usual format that you did was a letter. So I thought, well, using the skills I've got for that, I'm going to do a real world application of my GCSE English language coursework, and write to a few companies, very open, they're entirely obliged to say no. And actually, I've had some really kind no's, which quite often are just as good as if they'd said anything. But my very first one was emailing a company that produced a product at that point I was obsessed with. They were little fruit rolls, and the company is called Bear, and they make little fruit rolls, and they've got little cards in. And I loved them at that point, just because they do count as one of your 5 a day. I say that to all listeners. They are one of your 5 a day. And I emailed them saying, I've really, really enjoyed them. They're just like they brighten my day. And a box came through the post from Bear themselves, from Bear in the Woods. It was addressed with, it was a bumper box of Bear rolls and Bear merchandise. So I've got some photos of semi-bald neurosurgery me, who looks like a very thin skinhead, unwrapping my bumper box of Bear Bounty. It was just a real act of kindness on their part. They didn't have to. I wouldn't have minded if they hadn't, but it was very lovely that they did.
But before we go, Kaleb, I know you want to give a shout out to a couple of people, your cancer fam as such. So over to you for the
I think it's both sort of individuals and the general community, because I was on an Ellen MacArthur trip earlier this year, and it was the people I met there, and also I think it just reinforced the fact that not even pretty much everyone I have met every young person I've met who's had cancer, with all the different after effects people are living with, in everyone's own way. I don't think I've met anyone who isn't an extraordinarily high achiever, in whatever they do, whether it's the sort of managing of their condition, or with education, or with work, or with if they do volunteering, or if they or if they're at home for most of the time, or if they're whatever they do. I think I have a huge amount of pride in my cancer family, because I think they're an incredible bunch, actually. So a shout out and a lot of love to you all.
Big up the cancer community. Yeah, there's lots of people doing amazing things in the everyday, and in the not so everyday. I think that's absolutely true.
And I don't know any way better to finish this episode. So thank you so much, Kaleb, for coming on AfterThoughts. So, Alice May Purkiss, there was Kaleb and his stories of having a brain tumour.
Can I just say, Kaleb describing when he was talking about going into the fertility preservation place and said that there was no porn and he had to enter his mind palace. That's going to have me laughing for days. It was so good. Enter your mind palace.
I don't think the listeners know that, like, when we're listening to the stories, we put ourselves on mute, don't we?
Yeah.
And so, like, there is this moment when I can see you just like chuckling away, and I know that people can't hear this, but I can see these little one-liners, and Kaleb was full of them. There were so many great one-liners.
Kaleb was brilliant, though. He just brought such. For me as a language nerd, I could listen to Kaleb talk all day.
But after listening to Kaleb, Alice, what's been your afterthoughts on today's episode?
So my afterthoughts on today's episode of AfterThoughts, there was so much that I could have picked out because Kaleb was just fantastic, and I feel like I could have picked out anything, but I really want to touch on his story of recognizing cancer as a trauma. It took me a really long time to acknowledge and recognize that cancer is a trauma and that we should see it as such. And I think it can feel quite confronting to recognize that. But I really loved what he said, and I wrote it down because I'm always, like I said, writing things down for social. And he said a cancer diagnosis is like a very big rock thrown into a very small pond that damages someone's prized koi carp on the way. And I was just like, dude, you are amazing. It was so good, wasn't it? And I think it's really important that we do recognize cancer as a trauma. And we often think that trauma is something reserved for people who go to war or people who are in horrible accidents. But especially like we did, because of the way the podcast is structured, we didn't talk that much about how Kaleb found out about his cancer, but the way he found out about his cancer was really traumatic. But beyond that, cancer itself and treatments are traumatic. And, we're ripped out of our everyday existence and put in this crazy cycle of treatments, and they're invasive treatments, and it's test after test after test, and everything we know is challenged. And, I think it's so far removed from what we expect life to be, especially at a young age. And I think the more we can acknowledge that, the more healing it is for us. And I think for Kaleb to sit with us, two strangers really, essentially, and say, actually, you know what? This was a trauma for me. I think that's a really important thing. And I think the more of us who can do that, the more of us who can put our hands up and say, actually, that was a traumatic thing, I think the more we can open up this conversation. And that's essentially what AfterThoughts is all about, right? Opening up these conversations and saying, this happened to me, this is how I found it, this is what I learned. Hey, how do you feel about it?
I think for me, actually, like to slightly piggyback on and say that my afterthoughts was also around that, but everybody will find their own way to get to that place of acknowledgement. I think like for some people it's therapy, for some people it's coaching, some people it's going and doing art therapy. It could be anything that I went just for art therapy, whatever it could be coming on a podcast, and I don't know, but like it is a case of going, but it's in the searching, isn't it? And it's acknowledging that there is something that is going on for you, and that there is a feeling there, and I acknowledge that it's there, and I want to understand it, I want to investigate it, and I want to feel stronger with that. And I think, you're right, Alice, there's something really powerful about being able to come here and share that with us, like very landed. And I also think let's also highlight that lovely last kind of segment from Kaleb about talking about the cancer community and what that is. And I think I'll be honest as well and say that sometimes I feel like I'm 11 years post-treatment now, and maybe even 12, I don't know, and I didn't come to the cancer community straight off. I didn't really find it for about 4 years or something like that, and then found this connection to people, and it is a different thing as you move through it, but you never lose that connection to what brilliant people are there and things. So it was a lovely thing to hear that as he finished his recording with us.
Absolutely, 100%. Can I just say absolute hats off to Kaleb for being I'm having a shit time, can you send me some fruit roll-ups please?
That's a really good way to, So I wonder what everybody else will be emailing about after they've listened to this podcast. So on that note, Alice, shall we wrap up this evening's episode and say, as you did, I think, a couple of episodes ago, toodles.
Toodaloo!
If today's episode of AfterThoughts has brought up any thoughts or feelings that you'd like to speak to someone about, we really recommend grabbing a cuppa with a friend or dropping them a message. There are tons of charities out there who can help you if you've been through cancer and need a bit of extra psychological support.
Thanks so much to Teenage Cancer Trust for supporting Afterthoughts, the teenage years, and supporting teens and young adults diagnosed with cancer in the UK. The work they do is incredible. Find out more at teenagecancertrust.org.
Afterthoughts is produced by Alice May Purkiss and Toby Peach from Beyond Arts, with sound design from Dinah Mullen and Kieran Lucas.